Is it going through? I think so. I'm on. Oh, sorry. Hello, everybody. We're going to get started. Wonderful to see so many of you come, and thank you for your interest in our topic and our talk today. My name's Tim Surratt. I'm an associate professor of education at the University of Maine at Augusta. I'm also a member of the Bangor School Committee, and I look forward to presenting on our topic today. I'm going to hand things over and let my co-presenters introduce themselves.
There we go. Good morning, everyone. My name's Dana Carver-Bialer, she, her pronouns. I am the DEIB, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, though I feel fairly certain I don't need to spell out those letters in this room. But I'm the DEIB coordinator for the Bangor School Department, among wearing other hats, and I'm thrilled to be here with you all today.
Thank you. And good morning, everyone. My name is Marwa Hassanan, and I wear many hats as well in Bangor. I am the Associate Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Northern Light Health, and we are sponsors of the Inclusion Maine Conference. I'm very proud of that. And I'm also the chair of the Bangor School Committee, and I get to work with amazing colleagues. And so thank you for having us today.
So just a little bit session outline, or part of the session outline. There's another slide that Dana will talk a little bit about. So in the fall of 2020, the Bangor School Department created for the first time, a Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging Advisory Committee to the Bangor School Committee. And we really today want to give you sort of a 360-degree view of that committee, who's on the committee, the work that it's done, the initiatives, the challenges we've faced, some of the barriers and obstacles we've overcome in the work over the last several years, over the last 4 years. And really give you a feel for the committee, its inner workings, the people involved, the stakeholder groups, and particularly we want to highlight the good work that we've done for our students within the Bangor schools over these last 4 years. So that's part of the presentation. And then Dana, you want to talk a little bit?
So just by a show of hands, I feel like sessions of this nature tend to work better with us interacting with each other and not us talking at you. By a show of hands, how many folks in here have participated or facilitated or otherwise led a DEI, JEDI, DEIB, whatever the letters may be, committee of some kind? How many of you have served on one of them, multiple? I feel like frequently folks that are in this room or in this conference are the folks shoulder tap to frequently be on these committees or these panels. I know Marwa and I have found each other on these committees frequently. So of those of you who have served on these types of committees or attempts at this work, how many of you have walked away afterwards being like, that did not go so smoothly? Right. And I think it's with this DEI work, not to go on too much of a tangent on slide 2, but I think it's an emerging field, but we've all been doing the work before DEI was a thing. So navigating what this looks like, whether you're in the education sector or nonprofit or business world, navigating how this work looks and how it evolves, and being really transparent with how we found ourselves doing this work, I think is a really good starting point to have a rich conversation and figure out how to collaborate with one another across this very big, small state and advance the work. So what we thought we would cover today are a few different things: how we evolved through in 4-ish long, short years, the DEIB Advisory Committee, talk through increased roles that we've seen, including my position being created, and what are the needs for education, both in terms of needs for students, needs for supporting our staff at all levels, and also broader community education and cultural competency around these things, and sort of talk more as a group, interact around what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, and where do we go from here. Does that sound like a good plan? And I will take the liberty of speaking for all three of us that please interrupt us. Like, let's make this a really justify the case for equity, inclusion, and belonging as a priority in education in rooms like this. But in other spaces, I find myself needing to explain the why of this work. So typically I start with the broader theoretical why. I'm going to actually have you, Tim, if you don't mind, can you jump to the next slide? So the why in terms of the ethical imperative and the measurable outcome tends to be these areas that I focus on that we know from the research. So we know that you can have the exact same classroom on the same day with the same educator, and two students can have profoundly different experiences and profoundly different outcomes depending on a whole host of things in and out of their control. So knowing that there are really important differing experiences that students have, and we know that early childhood education has such a profound foundational impact on who we are. I'm sure I am not the only one that can think back to that thing in first grade or that time in third grade, or more commonly, that miserable middle school experience, whatever the case may be. I think that we can all point to some part of each of our own lived experiences that might have made you different than the majority of your peers in one or multiple identity categories. And that having a profoundly major experience on who you understood yourself to be, how you understood yourself in a classroom. Can anyone think of an experience, if you don't mind sharing, something that you remember either from your own experience or as an educator that had a big deal or a big impact? Does anyone feel like sharing? Oh, Aisha, thank you. Hello, friend.
Hi, friend. So, in the fourth grade, I was bused in New York City to a better school where I was faced with a lot of teachers who saw me in their own light. And my math teacher, it sticks with me to this day. My math teacher told me, that's okay. Black girls aren't usually that good at math. And that was at the board, me being my hip self of trying to be too cool for school, but struggling with math. And now I know I'm, all of us are great at math, but that really stuck with me. And it did change the trajectory of who I thought I could be as a student and as an educator. So
Thank you for sharing. And I will share personally that a whopping maybe 1 hour from where you grew up was where I grew up, in a profoundly white suburb of Long Island, New York. And I recall in third grade a unit on the Holocaust, and my teacher turning to me as one of two Jewish families in this suburb and asking me to teach the class about the Holocaust. Yeah, yes, that did happen. And that you can imagine my mom's reaction was very similar to that noise I heard right there as well. So how does that translate? I wish I could say at nearing 40 that's unheard of today, but we do know, and I can share this because I oversee civil rights investigations for the third largest district in the state of Maine, that we do know that students today and every day experience being called upon as, like, as the gay one or as the Black student, can you speak to this thing, which students are there to learn and not necessarily teach unless they want to. So those are things that we want to think about. Similarly, we know that whether they're informal, microaggressive experiences like these two examples, does anyone else want to share any other things along those lines? Yes, please do.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say that I have two undergraduate degrees, and one is in audio engineering and the other is in cybersecurity. And the amount of time that I hear, wow, you're really good for a woman or you're really good for a girl, it's shocking still to this day. So
These experiences, and whether I feel very silly having a mic. I've never once been told I needed a mic, but here we are. So I think when we take these informal interpersonal experiences and we combine them with the structural and systemic pieces like standardized testing, like how we do K-12 education, how we respond to things like discipline and attendance and grading, how we look at mentorship formally and informally, how we look at our policies like dress code has been a really interesting one that we've worked through in Bangor, how we look at modeling the windows and the proverbial mirrors of educational experiences. We know that school can't be everything. And what I tell folks a lot is I wish that school was not the best and safest and most validating experience for children, and a lot of the times it's not, but sometimes it is. And how do we make those balances validating and important? And also, how do we look at achievement and disciplinary gaps that we know exist across underrepresented identities like race, ethnicity, nationality, religious identity, sexual orientation, the big ones that we know are prevalent? How do we then like layer in our understanding of these big gaps that are going to be studied and measured for decades to come surrounding the pandemic? And we know that the pandemic has exacerbated gaps, particularly around wealth, wage gap, socioeconomic status. So looking at those things are the theoretical why. And I know that I feel strongly for as little as I know everyone in this room that we're all behind equity, inclusion, and belonging. We wouldn't be here otherwise, I assume. The other piece for people that roll their eyes at me with this and say this is all political nonsense, which we know unfortunately happens once in a while. The other why, if Tim, can I ask you to go back to the previous slide? Is that we know inevitably, like every other corner of the United States, Maine is evolving, and that is a beautiful, vibrant, wonderful thing for all aspects of rich culture, for economic prosperity, for decision making, all of those pieces. So I utilize this slide up here. I don't have an update from the next census, but looking at 1980 to 2014, the darker the concentration of purples, the higher the percentile of racial and ethnic identified minorities in the state of Maine. So we know that in every corner of Maine, we're seeing more diverse experiences. I focus on these four categories along the bottom of the screen here. We have seen in K-12 education across the state, which is no different than national trends, that we know that there's an increase in racial, ethnic underrepresentation, multi-faith families as well. We know that there's an increase in students with diverse learning needs, whether we're talking very visible, less visible, mental, emotional disability status that are identified typically through our 504 and IEP learning plans. We know that there's an increase in multilingual and immigrant households across the state of Maine. Bangor has seen a huge uptick in asylum and refugee seeking families through our partnership with Catholic Charities, and that has led to a really beautiful opportunity for an increase in multi-language learning in our school district. And finally, we've seen a huge rise, which is again aligned with our national numbers, of LGBTQ plus identified students. And that's a chicken or egg conversation for another day. But at the end of the day, we know that we're having a rise in the prevalence of LGBTQ plus identified students and at younger ages. So what does that look like? And how do we navigate inclusion for all of these populations?
Yeah, if I could just add one thing,
Please do.
when I first saw this slide, what really stuck out to me is how much the increases have happened in very rural parts of Maine, which I think is really important to recognize.
Okay, so I would really like to take us through the impetus for all of this work at Bangor School Department, and kind of the catalyst for this deep dive. Not that that we hadn't been doing a lot of the DEIB work without calling it DEIB. But, a series of things happened, and that was a true catalyst for where we are now. And I'm very grateful, right? In hindsight, at the moment, I was a first year Bangor School Committee member, and I thought, oh my goodness, what did I get myself into? But at the same time, we know that things don't happen in a vacuum, right? And so, several reasons why I think it kind of bubbled to the surface that year. And I'll talk a little bit more about what happened, but representation matters, and we know that. I am the first woman of color, I think, ever in the Bangor history to be on the school committee. And that, yeah, that face for me too. I was like, I need to run, and Bangor was extremely generous with me. There were 5 candidates, I believe, for only 2 seats, and I was right after the incumbent, very close to her in votes, beating 2 white males. So I think Bangor spoke loud and clear that year. We were ready for change, and it's been amazing. I've been the chair for the past 3 years, and colleagues have been really supporting this work, and it speaks volumes, right? But back in 2020, we had 5 Black students who came forward. And mind you, these students were top of our class type of students. Not that it matters, but I'm making a point here that we had a valedictorian and a salutatorian amongst these students. And for them to be terrified in the past to come forward speaks volumes, right? They had come forward and said that a series of incidents of racism had happened to them throughout their high school career, if you will, and they were terrified of coming forward. They felt like they had reached out, spoken to some teachers, some administrators. They felt like their voices weren't heard. And they didn't want to come forward in a big way in fear of retaliation, right? And no matter how many times we talk about psychological safety and how, we have zero tolerance policies for retaliation, we know that marginalized communities are afraid of stepping forward, right? And I deal with this on a daily basis at work. And so, namely, the students were called the N-word by their peers. Some students were defending slavery, white supremacy in their classrooms. And I think teachers were addressing this, but, they felt like these issues weren't addressed adequately. And so the students actually came forward their senior year, several of them, again, graduating. One of them, as I mentioned, the valedictorian, and said, and of course, it was right, I believe right in the midst or right after the George Floyd murder. And so again, everything was bubbling up. And they had me in terms of someone that they felt like, they could come forward to. We also had a Bangor city councilor who was the first ever Black woman also for Bangor. And so, again, things happened in that way. And so they came forward. They requested an outside investigation, and for students to come forward and say, we felt like our voices weren't heard then, and so we really would like someone from outside of Bangor to come in and investigate. They attended also school committee meetings, and they reported to us that again, they felt like they weren't valued, seen, and heard at that time. They felt that their calls for action were ignored. And so therefore we immediately jumped on it. At that time, our superintendent was Dr. Betsy Webb. And to be honest with you, she was mortified. We immediately jumped into it. The Bangor School Committee and Tim and I were, Tim is, I think you have 2 years ahead of me on the school committee. Yep. I think so. And I was a first year school committee member. And so we jumped into action. The school committee authored a resolution that condemned racism and really called for action. A Portland lawyer actually led the investigation, and she did find evidence that corroborated the stories of our 5 students. But, a range of anti-racism initiatives were immediately put into action. And I get, and again, I say Bangor had already taken steps, but for it to be, you know, front and center like this made me extremely proud. And we've had since then, and even then, we've had school districts from across the state reach out to us and say, tell us more and how can, you know, we follow your lead. But a more inclusive curriculum that features authors of color was immediately added into our curriculum. Diversity training for all school employees was mandated, and we have a lot of PD that includes DEIB work. Forming this DEIB advisory committee, that's something that Tim and I had gone back and forth, and we were like, why do we not even have a DEIB advisory committee? And immediately, and Dana and I will take you through the steps that initiated this formation. And, you know, Dana's position was also a part of this work. And we're so grateful to have her. And I keep telling her, you're not going anywhere. So we hired her as our affirmative action officer and Title IX coordinator. We also hired our communication director who also helped us through a lot of these steps because we wanted to make sure that we were transparent. The BDN was all over it. Bangor Daily News was all over it, right? If you Google it, it was all over, and it was quite embarrassing. We take a lot of pride in our schools and in our department and in academic excellence, but we knew even now when we talk about it, we're like, you know, let's be transparent about it. We can admit, you know, our mistakes and things that we should have done better. But now that we know better, we will definitely do better. And again, the work that has been as a result of this horrible incident, right, has been just amazing for students to come. We worked on our dress code, and Dana will give you more of the tangible stuff, the concrete, tangible things that that she has really led us on. But I think the most important thing to remember is that these brave students who came forward really spurred enough change, right, for us, and for all identities and for all demographics, and not just students of color. But now we've done a series of things to really elevate religion, gender, socioeconomic status, right? We've partnered a little bit with the University of Maine. We've created this MOU and a lot of PD. I'll have Dana give us more of the specifics, but just such incredible work. And so just again, show of hands, who has kind of had something like this in their schools where it's, you know, tricky and really heartbreaking, but then you come out of it feeling a little bit stronger and feeling a little bit more optimistic for the future. I saw some hands up. Yeah, and does anyone want to speak to anything or not yet? And we have more time for discussion at the end. Okay, I'll pass it on and hold those
Could I add
thoughts.
one,
Yes,
just add one
yes,
thing
please.
here? Yeah. And so, yes, I was on the school committee when this incident happened. It taught me many lessons. One that's really stuck with me is the importance of student voice. And I think school committees, there's a lot of distance between school committees and students. And one of the things that we've done, and Marwa and I were both advocated for this, was adding a student representative to our school committee, which is an important voice. And keeps us a little bit more in touch with what's going on at the school level. Thanks.
Thank you for adding that. And also, we've done this presentation in the past for other organizations and other conferences, and we had actually one of the students that was she's now a college student, but she was with us at that time to give her perspective. And unfortunately, she's traveling to Europe and couldn't make it today. So, but I wish you were here because her voice is powerful. And she also talks about being a biracial student at that time and what all of this work meant for her and to a lot of her classmates who were part of this investigation as well. Next slide, please. So these are the principles guiding the DEIB advisory committee. Yes, please. Has it what? I'm sorry. Oh, the cases, have they increased? We haven't had any cases or any students, that for me, that doesn't mean that there isn't something going on, but we are truly, we're not we're responding, and we're making sure that we're ahead of the work and not just being reactive. And at that time, I'll be honest with you, a lot of things felt like we're being reactive, right? Because we were embarrassed and upset, and correct me if I'm mistaken, Tim, but it was really embarrassing to be like on in the spotlight, but also feeling terribly for the students that we failed them. The students were gracious. Not that we want to ever put the onus should not be on the victims, right? But they, again, amazing students that said, this is what we wish to see. And they gave us a list of demands, actually. And we went through each and every one of them. The superintendent at that time was wonderful and really took their concerns and their voices very seriously. We, again, as I mentioned, the investigator corroborated all of their stories, and this was a Portland investigator. And as a result, we met all of their demands, but also made sure that we are being transformative and not just performative, right? This was not just checking the list and we're good now, but and you'll hear more of the concrete examples of the work that we've taken and making sure that we never go back to that again, right? And so as a result, we have our I think first Black woman on our committee now, Shelly O'Carey. I don't know if anyone knows her, but she is phenomenal, and more interest in this work. We'll talk a little bit about the formation here coming up, but I'm happy to answer any specific questions too. But if you look up our website, and it's specifically DEIB advisory, you'll see this basically on our in a charter guiding principles, and really Dana and I took this, and I believe it's the first year, if I'm not mistaken, and went through the committee. And the committee, as you'll see, we have subject matter experts from across the state. And so we feel very, very blessed and privileged between our networking and people that we know from across the state, especially Dana's connected to everybody in the state. And so we really reached out and grabbed subject matter experts who could help us in this work. Again, making sure that this is not just checking the box, but we want to make sure that we are leaders in the state here with DEIB, but making sure that school is a welcoming and safe place for all school community members to bring their rich lived experiences, perspectives, identities. So we're reaching out to different community members. Again, we have refugee families, asylum seekers, but we also reached out to different faith leaders who are with us in this work. So what does welcoming and safe place mean, right? It means different things for different individuals. And so you'll see, again, having representation from all social identities. Social, emotional, and behavioral supports are understood as critical prerequisites to academic learning. Making sure that all academic and non-academic programming is culturally sustaining and co-constructed with school and community members. Now, mind you, when we went through this, it was, we nitpicked on each and every word. It was, it got heated a little bit too, because some individuals were like, I don't like this word. Remember? No, I like this word instead. And so this, to come to these guiding principles, was a very intentional and deliberate process. And we made sure that every voice was represented here, making sure that there's ongoing professional development for every single staff member in regards to anti-racism training, anti-bias, culturally sustaining practices, programs, curriculum, instruction, and policies. Again, these are mandatory, and Dana leads all of these. I know she and I have also conducted studies, like book studies with our administrative teams. We do a lot of the anti-bias training with them, and we work together on that. Staff are respected and regarded as knowledgeable, and that's something that we talk a lot about, because now in the the world that we live in, we have parents that come to us, of course, demanding, certain things being taught or not being taught. And so many of our teachers on this DEIB advisory committee really want to make sure that they are regarded as knowledgeable and they have the best interests for their students. But also families and caregivers are respected as well. And they are engaged as partners in their kids' educations. And we are inviting them to collaborate. We actually have several family members who are on our committee as well. We make sure that their voices are heard. But our district seeks input and expertise from all stakeholders, really making sure that our schools are equitable when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And next slide, please. And so this is exactly what I was referring to in terms of the breakdown. So Dana and I chair the committee together, and we've chaired it for the past, I think, 3 years since its inception. The membership reflects, and I know Tim, it revolves. She and I are the co-chairs, and then every single school committee member, we're hoping to have a year or more than 1 year if there's interest. So I know Tim was on there last year. Or the year before? Last year with us. And I know he was so gracious because he loves this work. And he said, I'll pull back because I know everybody else is really interested. And he was gracious in allowing someone else to Shelley to be on the committee this year. But we have students and it's wonderful. Dana does such a great job of identifying students who really, really would love to be on our committee. And, being mindful that there are competing priorities, right? And sometimes, we have 2 or 3 students on there. They're super engaged, but they're busy, right? And so she does a great job of connecting with them and making sure that, I understand you're really busy, but your voices are important to us. And so getting that feedback from them. We have district-wide parents and caregivers. And so Bangor, we have this, socioeconomic divide, the east side versus the west side. And so we're very mindful of that we're engaging parents on both sides of Bangor and not just sometimes the east side we feel guilty that, there's parents are sometimes have more privilege in attending meetings and so forth. So we're really mindful of that and making sure that Dana and I actually go through the list and who's a West Side parent, who's an East Side parent, and making sure that we're making opportunities for all parents to who would like to be with us to have an opportunity. District-wide staff, we have principals, we have teachers, and it becomes over the years, I've seen a lot more interest, which is a wonderful thing, right? And so sometimes you have teachers who are super engaged. They are DEIB diehards, as we call them. And so we just want to make sure that we give ample opportunities for all teachers, right? And we've seen this committee grow now to about 40 members, right? And so when everyone's there, it's a beautiful, robust conversation that we're having. And then community partners, as I mentioned, we have civic leaders, we have business partners, subject matter and content area experts. And so right here, and I won't read them all off, but community partners in all of these area of expertise and these partnerships. So we even had our Bangor Y CEO, Diane Dickerson, who was part of the committee. I believe she still is, but everyone's extremely busy. Partners for Peace, the Islamic Center of Maine in Orono, Congregation Bethel. So again, making sure that faith leaders are represented. Catholic Charities in the Maine Multicultural Center, especially now with an influx of refugees. Bangor is now I think a hub for refugee resettlement. So we've had many families who have just recently joined us, about 100 individuals total. So, a lot of work with Catholic Charities in the Maine Multicultural Center, the NAACP, their president was also a member as well. And of course that revolves. Penobscot Nation, we had Molly and Dana, who I believe is here today. I'm looking forward to seeing her. But again, diverse perspectives and many stakeholders from across the state. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Dana.
I could jump to the next.
Yeah.
Could jump to the next slide. So we designed this with the intention of giving folks here, it's the idea of take what works for your organization and toss what doesn't. And again, from the foundation of transparency, we've evolved how our DEIB advisory committee has looked and worked based on honest conversations and reflecting on need, what works, what doesn't, in the absence of being able to have 8-day weeks and one full day where everyone is equitably and adequately paid for their time and we get to have DEIB retreats. I cannot create that, unfortunately. In the absence of time, this is how we've sort of seen the evolution work, both in terms of configuration, frequency, and subcommittees of an advisory committee. So initially, the year I jumped on board, and again, in the name of transparency, it I think initially made colleagues and administrators of mine nervous, but I am very vocal of leading with my position was created as a reaction to a high profile investigation. My background is teaching and administration in higher ed settings. I have literally no background in K-12 education other than being a student and now being the mother of a kindergartner. I literally read that headline in the Bangor Daily News on a Sunday morning and was feeling exhausted with higher ed. No offense, love some higher ed, but was feeling a little burned out and said, oh, this position is a hybrid of learning and teaching and civil rights policy compliance, which was one of my degree backgrounds. Maybe I'd be good at that, and applied and magically ended up in this wacky new position. These standalone positions are popping up around the country. Not shockingly, they exist more in highly populated, urban, and diverse areas. So up and down the West Coast, Texas, New York, Boston, New York, Florida. I literally started Googling my job title to find other people in this role. And I realized quickly that mine was the first standalone in the state of Maine and sort of went from there. And luckily, there are more of us now, which is really exciting. So initially, when I jumped into this role, it was November of 2020, a very funny time to also throw a massive sector career change into the mix. And we initially broke down how we were doing this work by these 4 subcommittees. So we focused on curriculum and professional development, hiring and retention, mentorship and community engagement, which has always been a foundational priority of our current superintendent, James Tager, who's retiring next month. And taking on what we initially described as an equity audit. I'm sure a lot of you in this room have taken on or contemplated or thought about what an equity audit or some other comparable research looks like. That's one of those phrases that can mean 500 things. So navigating what that looked like was our sort of first step. The big accomplishments from that year I would identify as developing the foundational language, like what Marwa just walked you all through, really having the committee be a public presence and something folks talked about and learned about. We also had a fabulous student serve on that committee that is part of the committee work and part of her humanities senior project, developed an 8-page new student guide that was since been translated into 4 languages with QR codes that's really accessible for any new student truly moving into the district, but especially helpful for students coming from other countries just to navigate, like, this is what our public transportation looks like. These are where food pantries are. These are different houses of worship. These are different areas to get halal or kosher compliant food, things along those lines. So that was a really good project. Next year, we were like, okay, how can we do this a little differently? So we had quarterly meetings. Shocker, not enough time. but longer meetings. And we met all together. We worked through a few really good projects, the largest one being a partnership with the University of Maine. We developed an MOU that had a few different components. We had a 9-credit, 3-course bridge that we were able to offer to all of our teachers, and the school district paid for. So it worked most aligned with the master's program at the University of Maine for teachers to fulfill that part of their degree. It also encompassed a research component. So that's what formalized this idea of an equity audit, in terms of looking at both qualitative and quantitative data, because I'm a big fan of, we could all project and think what we need to do, but actually having the data to say, these are our areas of inequity or disparity, these are the needs of the community, feels like a better fit than us hypothesizing. So those are sort of the big pieces, policy pieces, and I'm happy to talk about this when we open this up a little bit more if this is of interest. There were a handful of different policy areas that we worked on either collectively within this committee, or I was tasked to work on just in terms of my own position. So I worked on, I think, 4 or 5 different policy updates. And then fast forward to this year, we shifted back to monthly meetings because 4 meetings across an academic year was not nearly enough. And we focused back in on professional development and curriculum. We looked at recruitment, hiring, and retention, which I'm sure this is a big issue that all of you are thinking about constantly. I think the further, I'm making a gross generalization here, but I think the further north we get up the East Coast, the harder recruitment and hiring and retention, not one of the 3, is to do and do well. And I know that's not a Bangor problem or a Penobscot County problem or an education problem. It's a workplace quandary, if you will. And I'm a big fan of, if we just look at hiring, I don't think that's ethical. I think that we need to make sure that if we have folks moving to the greater Bangor area, if they are not tethered to the community and do not quickly find folks and reasons to stay, they're not going to. And I hold myself as part of that. So figuring out what that looks like is a really big piece. Finally, another committee that we really focused in on, this last 2 were sort of merged together, looking at mental health, social emotional learning, I would encompass within that, and trauma-informed practices. Again, I think you could make a case for any DEI thing being any subject area or any priority. We were really committed to merging this work all together. So what has that translated to? We're continuing to build partnerships both internally, externally, looking at different pathways for professional development, because I'm sure, like us, you all have folks that know the books that have not even been published yet, and the best work and the best blogs and the best podcasts. And then you have some staff that hear DEI and avoid it like the plague. So finding entry points to keep this work from being siloed is the name of the game here. So if we want to jump to the next slide,
I jump in just for 1 second?
please do.
Yeah. So a lot to chew on with this slide, and we're rated at about the halfway point of our time together. It might be a good spot just to see if individuals have any questions. Yeah, let me.
I'm really happy to see that you have the mental health and trauma informed practices up there. And I'm just wondering what some of those are, if you wouldn't mind sharing, like what are some of the things that you do to support the mental health in this?
Absolutely. Do you want me to? Yeah. Sure. So we are really fortunate that on the DEIB committee, we have students and staff who are really concentrated both in terms of expertise area and interest. In mental health, we also, by virtue of the parents and community leaders, we have a which we recognize, we're like, this is a talent area we have. Coincidence or not, a lot of the parents, guardians, caretakers, and area experts are clinicians, either social workers, private practice therapists, work in one of the two major health systems. We have social workers in our schools that were really interested in being a part of the work. One of our now former school committee members, who is an area psychologist, was really interested in shepherding this work. So it's looked like a few, and the other piece as well, we've partnered with Penobscot Community Health Center, and they now have an in-house in the high school federally qualified health center practice, like a primary care and urgent center practice in our high school. And we're not the first Brewer had PCHC Brewer High School for, is it like 18 years? I feel like it's a long time they've had
Long time.
presence there. So we sort of crafted that model for the high school. I think it was a long time coming partnership. And now they have both, they do primary care, they do sort of urgent triage care, sports physicals, and now last year they had one full-time mental health provider. We now have a second full-time mental health provider, and not shocking, their panels were full immediately. So merging all of those pieces has been the how do we advance this work. It's looked like a few different things. The predominant things I could think of are just considerations for all of the work we've done. Another big piece of it was this year rolling out this was the first year, I believe, ever that Bangor participated in the MIAS, so the Maine Integrated Youth Health Survey. Did I get that acronym correct? Looking around the room for validation. Great. So Bangor, this was the first year Bangor participated in that. So being able to utilize and move through and evolve from that data and analyzing that has been a really big piece of it. The other piece that the mental health trauma informed work has really focused in on is what are other data points and what are other programs, both formal and informal, we can use. So we've worked through a few other programs, platforms. I'm trying to think of the name and I can't, and I feel like very silly. The other program for the positive interventions.
Oh, PBIS.
PBIS, there we go. And I'm not I'm not on that team directly, but sort of navigating the nuances of PBIS and what kind of a fit that is for our district. That's been like the big piece. I mean, other aspects that it's just been really personally helpful for me. I'm not a clinician. I work really closely with all of our mental health staff because, as you can imagine, when students come in to find me for a complaint, luckily there is a me and they very much know where to find me more times than not. I know my boundaries and I'm clear about this is how I can help you, but also creating the supportive measures of pulling in and developing really close relationships with mental health expertise is a big piece. Yeah, please.
And just to add to that, because I have been fortunate to be on the mental health subcommittee this year, and I feel like I have major imposter syndrome because you have all of these wonderful subject matter experts, like Dana said, psychologists, school guidance counselors and school counselors, and those who are in private practice and social workers and so forth. And so a really interesting aspect of all of this work that has recently come up is restorative justice and restorative practices as well. And so that's something that we have looked into more deeply this year. And we've never had those discussions before. And so unfortunately, our superintendent is retiring, as Dana said, and we're knee deep right now, Tim and I, in a superintendent search. But we're hoping that the next superintendent will really take that and run with it, because that has come across to us as something that is not just helpful and critical, but also it's a need, right? And we have surrounding districts who, have really kind of put restorative practices or restorative justice front and center, and we really want to implement that as well.
One quick thing I'll add, and then I think we'll continue, and it goes back to that theme around student voice. Something I've found really uplifting is we've done some surveying of students, and at the high school, and the feedback has been extremely positive from the students in terms of the PCHC clinic and them finding it to be a really valuable resource that's available to them. So I think that's powerful.
I'm gonna jump to the next slide. I've talked a lot about much of this, but to sort of put it all together, I think that the DEIB Advisory Committee, it's an evolving practice. It's an evolving work. What feels to me like the big wins, really seeing increased communication and transparency, both with our students knowing even basic things like every single school district that receives state and federal funding has to have a designated Title IX coordinator and affirmative action officer. And what does that mean? What does that look like? Not in theory, but in practice. Those types of conversations, having students know where policies are and how to access them. Parents having really clear transparency and access in terms of information about DEI work and all school work. I think we've really grown there. Building and sustaining partnerships, and that's hard work. Doing that meaningfully has been another really big piece. Developing evidence-based practice. And for me, that means we don't theorize and make decisions. We accrue data and make informed decisions. And that's tough work. Having anything with the word audit in it creates a jumpy dynamic, particularly if you're saying we're doing an equity audit of our district educators. Getting meaningful buy-in for that without people feeling like they're being attacked is really challenging. But really developing a climate where we can look at honestly our work and what's working and what's not from all these perspectives and seeing where things don't line up. That's been an ongoing conversation so we can meaningfully move forward. PD has been a really big piece of this. So how do we create both the floor and the ceiling in terms of culturally competent, culturally resilient, and appropriate language and knowledge for our staff? I've always said that diversity of thought is the most important and foundational diversity that there is, and I believe that. That does not negate, I don't want us to vote the same way and think the same way, but I feel strongly that no matter how we're politically positioned, what our identity wheels look like, we all want students to feel safe and be able to be the best them that they can be. I don't think that anyone is showing up to work in public education in 2024 if they don't believe that. So setting those foundational steps, acknowledging that students have different experiences in the same room, giving really clear expectations of our policies and practices, and empowering our staff to feel comfortable exploring this stuff. How many folks in this room are educators or have taught formally or informally at some point, right? I'm sure I'm not alone in all of you that raised your hands. How many of you had a day where no matter whether you were the very brave folks teaching little children through higher education, I'm sure everyone that raised their hands had that moment or multiple moments where you're teaching, you feel as prepared as possible, you've taught the same lesson or done the same activity 20 times. All of a sudden, you notice this thing happening in front of your eyes in real time where student asks a question, someone responds, someone says something completely outrageous, there's a conflict. All of a sudden, you're like, oh, I'm a headline. Today is the day I'm getting fired, right? We have all had those moments, and I feel very safe in assuming that we're all very closely attuned to the news, local, statewide, national, when we are dealing with the strangest, wildest collision. I hate to say in these unprecedented times, because I think we've been saying that for a while now, but we're in a really strange place in time where we have a collision of intellectual freedom, free speech versus protected speech versus hate speech, politicization of this work. We look at what's going on in college campuses across the country, that we're dealing with some really, really big things. And that heavily, I would argue, falls on our educators to hold in their esteem commitment to their jobs, not wanting to get it wrong. And I think that none of us want to get it wrong. So I think creating a climate, I don't think we get it perfectly by any means, but trying really hard to empower our teachers to move forward with this work, and find what fits for them. That feels like a very big win for me. Other policies and sort of initiatives that we've taken on, updating policy AC, which is our non-discrimination and affirmative action policy. Every district you live in has one of those. Updating our dress code. We further developed and updated our transgender student guidelines regulation. Working through different statements that have been formally endorsed by the school committee and our superintendent, up to and including we did a joint testimony on a bill in Augusta last year around library holdings and DEI and critical race theory work that was being contested. And other things that did not make the big list, but I think are as if not more important. We have a non-denominational, multi-faith private space designated in our high school where any students of faith backgrounds, if they want a quiet place to review religious texts, prayer, meditation, it's a space that is accessible to them. We felt like this was extremely important, and recognize its importance for our students who are Muslim practicing during Ramadan. We have students of literally every faith background in our school. So that was a really important thing. We also streamlined our process for our students who wish to update names, preferred names and pronouns. So big and little things alike have been ongoing conversations. Jump to the next slide. Perfect. So roles and collaboration, and I can talk, all of these slides could be 90 minutes, but we have, alongside my role, there have been a few other roles that have been wonderfully approved by our school committee and our superintendent. School safety and communications director was a position hire developed at the same time as mine. We have two now graduation coaches, one that works with 8th into 9th graders and another that works with our 10th through 12th graders. They sort of aligned with the student support team to identify marginalized or high-risk students and help give them really personalized care and coaching in a multifaceted team to help them be successful, both with the benchmark of graduation and all the other ways we can measure success. We've also had an increase in special education positions, most notably our MLL positions, with an increase of our multi-language learners. Finally, community collaborations, partnerships, really being accessible for all of our community members has been a really important piece of this. This looks like everything from public health, advocacy organizations, communications between our different levels of government. So I know that, and you both can certainly speak to this better than I can, but what does it look like to have meaningful communication between our city council and our school committee, our school committee and our staff? I don't think it's particularly common for school staff to work so closely with our school committee, and it's a position I feel really lucky that it's just been this organic part of this process for me. And even what does the collaboration look like between, there's a DEIB, it's called the Racial Equity and Human Rights Committee with the Bangor City Council, having that committee serve alongside our DEIB advisory committee. And very intentionally, we have one student representative on the city council's committee who also attends ours and acts as sort of a conduit between the two. So just making sure that we're meaningfully doing what we say we want to do and making those intentional decisions so we're not lost in the labyrinth of municipal government, I think is really important there. Also communication. So I work really closely with our school safety and communications director. We developed an in-depth calendar for different cultural, religious, community, statewide recognitions to make sure that we create those opportunities for informal education as much as possible. So for instance, I screen grabbed, if you will, having different educational opportunities with QR codes for Transgender Day of Remembrance, anytime we could be really transparent with trainings. We rolled out a new technology system a year and a half ago for school safety. It includes this button thing on the back of our badges. This is not my actual badge. I don't know why I did that. But it was, I think, pretty covered in local news there. Having a training on what that looks like and what our school safety response that was streamed right through Facebook. Things like that, I think, are all a part of DEIB, whether or not they fall into the DEIB silo or not.
Yeah, I think it's really nice too that Dana works closely with our communication director, as she said. But every single holiday or celebration or awareness event that is, of importance is always on our website and on Facebook, on social media. And I think it's really important. I've heard from a lot of community members who have said, thank you. That sense of belonging is really important for for my children, especially those who are of different faith backgrounds and different ethnicities, et cetera. And so again, that is really, really important that when we, we say what we mean and mean what we say. And those are wonderful examples right there.
So finally, what are we doing in terms of education? I don't want to take a ton of time. I'd rather us talk together, but we can certainly delve into this a bit more later. But what is, and I think we have obligations for all three of these. So how are we providing through the very formal avenues like our Maine learning results, through those informal educational opportunities? The way I look at it is any way you define DEIB work, giving our students the tools in their metaphorical toolboxes to become the best consumers of media, the best global citizens and collaborators. That's a skill set that will make them tomorrow's leaders. And I know that sounds cheesy, but I believe that work. And I believe that that's not an add-on or separate to academic excellence. That is academic excellence. So really forming partnerships, collaborations in classrooms, outside of classrooms to do that work is a big piece of it. How do we again train our staff and provide those enrichment opportunities? A big piece of it. And how do we create the community awareness and just create a culture that is normed to have these things be a part of our everyday conversations? Those are all sort of big pieces. So again, having live streamed trainings as much as possible, having different holidays, and we certainly can't have an exhaustive list, but responding to community needs and creating, again, it's tough because one might take a step back and say like, listing religious holidays in a K-12 school on social media, that's going to get into some interesting dynamics. And you're absolutely right. I think tethering it to community support, community need, and education is the path forward. Does not hurt anyone to learn about different community recognitions, religious holidays that are practiced globally that makes people good global citizens and good neighbors. And similarly, what are the different ways in which we have visual representations, teaching, learning? I love this example. This is from the Vine Street School, which is a pre-K to 3 school in our district. Principal Lynn Silk, who since retired, created this visual of many hands working together at the Vine Street School, had the construction paper in all of the skin tones, and students self-selected their own. And it was, she said, really funny because frequently students picked skin tones that they thought absolutely matched that looked nothing like their skin tones, and went from there. But it just, again, sort of gave really good empowered visuals that went along with curriculum there. I'm gonna jump to the next one. Finally, because I know a lot of folks that are in education really want to know the nuts and bolts of professional development, I will throw that up there. Please follow up with me for what works and what doesn't. But these are just a few examples of professional development opportunities that we have rolled out. Frequently, educators will ask me, "That's great. Don't give me the theory, Dana. Just tell me what to do." And I love that idea, but we know that no matter how hard we try DEIB, there's no like terminal degree or badge or tattoo you can get that means that you're done learning. It's a lifelong process. But there are really good tools and best practices that I've accrued from 12 years of teaching and borrowed and learned from folks that know way more than me. So I've created, I think I'm up to like 6 or 7 iterations of a DEI toolkit that I've made for pre-K to 3, middle school, and high school. And the first list of bullet points are some of those pieces that are really accessible for folks that are like, okay, what can I do tomorrow? There are actual things you can do tomorrow. There are things you could do at the start of a new quarter or start of a new year. And then there are some like longer term commitments. So that's sort of piece one. Another piece, because I think that cultivating recognition that we have area experts amongst our teachers, because teachers indeed are very educated leaders in this work. Giving teachers the opportunity to teach each other is really exciting, and also watching teachers teach other teachers is a really funny experience in and of itself. So the bottom list, this is just from August of this past year at Teacher Academy, the precursor to our school year, and then our March in service a month and a half ago. This is just as a quick sample of some of the workshops that our staff got the opportunity to learn from. So everything from DEIB leadership, they titled it Empowering Educators, Empower Students. A multi-school team of educators that focused on neurodiversity and disability inclusion. A set of 3 teachers from 3 different schools partnered to do examining biases related to low socioeconomic status. We had a partnership of community, 2 community leaders, a parent, and 3 teachers and an administrator facilitate supporting immigrant, refugee, and asylum seeking families and their students. And then we had a really great presentation on culturally responsive family engagement with a trauma informed lens. So those are just a few examples. It's not exhaustive by any means, but different areas that we focused on giving staff the tools that they need.
So given the time, we have about 16, 17 minutes left. I'm going to skip over this slide. Maybe we'll come back to it if we have time, because I do want to give people an opportunity to have a little bit of discussion and learn from one another. And this could sort of, I think, lead us into a question and answer portion as well. So think on these questions, have some discussion at your table, and you could certainly replace the word school with whatever institution that you're a part of. So think on these a little bit. Challenges, barriers associated with the work of the DEIB committee. Current, and if you're already a part of one in a school or an institution, think on question 1, and if not, think on question 2, and then have some discussion at your table.
Tim's, I'm gonna get fired, Mom.
So I, right outside my class, we had this little kindergarten girl, and she didn't call her Mr. Surratt, she called her Mr. Cigarette. And when she would get upset, he knows where it's going. She would get upset, she would run out of the classroom and take her clothes off. Because that's what she did. I'd be like, get back here. And so, and our wing, that was the kindergarten first grade wing, the parent, we come to wait to pick up their job. So there's this big lobby full of parents, and she's upset, she's something at the end of the day, from tearing out of her class, and the teacher calls in, he comes to the rescue, she comes tearing out, she hides under the table, with no clothes on, yelling, no, Mr. Cigarette, no, Mr. Cigarette. And he was like, okay,
Sweating.
yes, he was like, there was nothing to do, every parent's going.
This wasn't the training.
Yeah.
not.
So
Out of
every-
my hand conditioner.
I love it.
Every parent is looking down the hall. She's this little tiny bit of a thing. Is just Sarah. I don't remember her last name.
Oh my
And we go,
Lord.
I remember the story. Coming down. Where we're gonna be in the news.
Yeah.
That was it. I saw it. It was right outside my door. I came out and like.
Yeah, you just watch.
That is amazing.
Where were you?
My name's Dana. Thank you. What is your name?
D. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So yeah, it was like,
I'm so familiar.
I work for the department.
That's what. Yeah.
So yeah, but anyway, so I got to see filming. I am, I'm not splitting. But yeah, so, yeah, I watched his.
You wear sneakers.
I'm gonna call him. And that was the best part too, that she wasn't, it wasn't just the whole situation, it was also yelling at the cigarette.
Oh
And
my
my
word.
yeah, this is cigarette for, I call it a cigarette. So if you ever feel like in a meeting that, hey, this is a cigarette, oh, I mean.
Mine would have been the first time I had a department chair, observe my, the students. Department chair with my observing the first thing, the students pushing back, which bring me to privilege 7 minutes about it, and I had the students respectfully, like, savagely challenge. Yeah, but like,
Okay, if we could, I hate to cut off such good conversations, but if we could come back. So we're closing in on about 10 minutes before the end of the session, and this might be a good spot to allow you to either, tell us a little bit about your conversation at your table or or ask us questions. So we're gonna open it up to you, and if you, I can bring over the mic. Thanks.
Thank you. First of all, you guys are doing an amazing job. I'm very impressed. And we were wondering here, Portland has a budget that's been cut like big time this year, especially we think we're getting $9 million or something like that. So I'm wondering what kind of budget are you guys working with to have something like this, because it's very impressive.
Great question. And I think we are in a very pro-education, progressive city. City council is amazing. Do you have the same, or do you? Oh, okay. And knock on wood, we've been extremely fortunate that we haven't had pushback, right? And I think that says a lot about the city that we live in. Again, very progressive in terms of education. We haven't had any of the opposition that many of the school boards across the state has had. And I think it's because we're very unified. We're a very strong committee who basically that says, this is important to us, and we've made that very clear. I mean, we're in the paper all the time, but I think also that we're strong in our resolve, right? This is important to us. The incidents that I mentioned earlier came out, but we're able to kind of move the needle because of the support of our city council. Again, very pro-education, very progressive when it comes to DEIB work, and you definitely need that. That's critical, right? That's number one. But in terms of budget per se, a lot of this stuff has to do with, PD, with Dana's work. And I'm trying to think of, and maybe you can help me with this, Tim, but I don't think we really have, I'm trying to think of like the specifics about budgeted items other than personnel, PD, things of that nature. But a lot of this work is coming from Dana, right? It's supported by our school committee.
Yeah, that's exactly where I was going. I think if you get right on a nuts and bolts level, this work isn't a significant driver or an add-on in terms of budgeting thus far. And I think the value we're getting, the return we're getting on the amount of money we're investing in it it's a no-brainer. And I think our community understands that.
Yeah.
So I think that's the conversation. If that's what you're getting at, sort of the budget considerations related to this specific work and sort of protecting it when cuts, may or may not come.
Yeah. And go ahead. I was just going to say grants too. Grants
Yeah.
are so important. We have an amazing grant writer. And maybe do you want to speak to some of the grants?
Sure. I mean, to be really honest, I think that this work could take on a larger part of a budget that I know that this isn't the fiscal climate to ask for. To be again really transparent, if we had a civil rights or civil law department with 10 people in it, I think that there could easily be 10 full-time employed people. And also for best practice, it's tough messaging that half of my job is the DEIB proactive work, and then the other half is the investigation reactive work. It's not ideal always to message to our staff, lean on me, I'm a member of your team, collaborate with me, help you with our policies. Oh, but at any point in time, I can and will investigate you, and I do, and I have, and I will continue to. So that's tough, but there's one of me, there's not more. Other districts I know will have to scale that up. I know Portland Public Schools has multiple roles within a DEIB and civil rights umbrella. And I know from a national organization, just to give context, I was mentored by the Civil Rights Compliance Director for Miami-Dade schools, which is over 370 schools. So it's, I mean, blows out of the park anything in scale in this state. But just their investigation team, not their DEI department, which is different, has over 40 people doing investigations, and that's their full-time job. So it's a challenge in terms of the community pushback and feedback. I mean, Penobscot County and Bangor is a solidly purple part of the state and a really good reflection of national dynamics. But to that end, I will say um, the egregious voicemails or emails or social media feedback that a role like I can't speak for either of you, but that I have received personally and professionally have overwhelmingly been folks outside of our school district or our sending districts. It's more folks that read a soundbite online or something, and that I'm lucky that I feel very protected by our school committee. And I'm not saying this because they're right here, but by our school committee and our superintendent. But I also want to just create recognition that that folks with identities that are underrepresented, that are more visual than mine, would not feel as safe. Folks that are in more hostile climates without strong leadership to support this work would feel less safe. Folks that are newer to the work, like this is not my first time at the rodeo with controversial stuff, so I'm okay, but it's no joke, and the burnout is profound. Yeah.
I think we have.
Hi.
Hi, good morning, and thank you so much. Congratulations on the work you're doing. It's really amazing, frankly. Couple of things. I happen to reside in a very affluent community in southern Maine, in your county, and we have had issues pertaining to DEI that has risen to the level of Boston's Department of Education Civil Rights Division coming to our school district. And believe it or not, those problems still persist. At what point do you think the state will take this matter serious enough to not only have a deliberate division that addresses these issues, whether it's in the context of child development, whether it's the context of the state surviving demographically, whether it's in the context of economic development, or just simply human dignity. Secondly, I'm very concerned with the plight of immigrant asylum seekers and refugee families in this state. I had the unfortunate opportunity to volunteer and then work for an organization which provides these immigrant and refugee services. Unfortunately, there's a lot of fraud, there's a lot of abuse, there's a lot of neglect. And when you take people, and I can't say that I came here as an asylum seeker. I'm an immigrant from Jamaica, grew up in Westchester County, New York, educated in Paris, back here. My husband's a Mainer, Jewish and Arabic. And what I've noticed is we now have this sort of legalized human trafficking system in play, where people who have been so exploited and so violated, God help you if you're not with Catholic Charities or Jewish Alliance, God help you, because as we take a look at what happened with children with disabilities and they were sent back into the public system, there's a dollar connected to every single immigrant. So there's financial gain and benefit associated with them, whether or not services are provided. So one of the things I'd like to say to you is, how close is your connection, for example, to legitimate organizations like Catholic Charity in the context of supporting these families so they don't come from being violated in their home country here to the United States, where we are all believers in democracy and human right and dignity, only to be further exploited and violated. Thank you.
Well, thank you for two amazing questions. Oh, sorry. Thing one, in terms of the state and federal oversight, my goodness, I hope so. I mean, what I tell folks, which I think again, feel like I'm in the business of making people nervous all the time. That I have a right on my desk. If you are not satisfied with how, like, here's the policy, here's my contact info. If I am not doing this policy justice, I give people and I tell people more than any person in the Bangor School Department. My bosses are the Maine Human Rights Commission oversees our state policies for policy AC, and then the OCR, the Office for Civil Rights, which Boston's the closest office. So I'm guessing that's what you're referring to. I'm accountable to them. And when I'm making tough calls that are immersed in local politics, that is the stuff that keeps you up at night and makes me want to puke more days than not. Luckily, that's not every day, but when those issues occur, my like compass is if we get, not if, but when we get audited from Maine Human Rights Commissioner OCR, can I actively say, here was my process, I handled it with integrity, and I followed the laws, which are inherently flawed as well. Title IX just had a 1,500-page new regulation come out. We're navigating some weird stuff, but I think to your point, you have state, local, national entities. I wish I had an answer, my goodness, but at least getting it right and being a part of these conversations is that piece. So I wish I had a better answer for you, but that's my first thought. In terms of our asylum seeking and refugee families, I can't speak to the whole state and the whole climate. In terms of who shepherds the resettlement and integration for our families in the greater Bangor area, it's Catholic Charities that oversees it. Luckily, I can share we have a phenomenal working relationship with them. They're site directors on our DEIB committee, and they do, I don't know if this is a typical model, and please correct me if I'm getting this wrong. They are the initial resettlement source, and then they have a very close working relationship with the Maine Multicultural Center, who then has a volunteer program that I'm a volunteer for. It's Dina Yakubaja, who I believe, isn't she here? She's here right now. She is their program director. And she's also a clinical social worker and serving on our city council and a close friend to all of us. So I think by the nature of Bangor being a big, small, I shouldn't say city, but it's a small city in a big, small state. I think it's worked really beautifully, and I don't want to pretend like that's the case everywhere, but I think for us, does that sound right?
Yep.
Okay. Go ahead.
I think we're past noon. We are past noon time. We don't want to keep you